How about it for Jim Avila, the brilliant former ABC News correspondent who joins us every Friday, and a guy who's forgotten more about politics than most of us will ever know, Michael Shure. Michael, we always are grabbing because he's covering rallies and he's covering various political events across the country. And so it's always good when we get the two of you together. You saw that Fox News was, as I was mentioning in the first hour, wants to get back into the Trump business. Sean Hannity is doing a recorded show, town hall, their own town hall, with Donald Trump. It'll be on Hannity's show next week. That's just more of the Trump show, I guess. Right,
yeah,
boys?
It's definitely a show. It's not journalism. As a matter of fact, Sean Hannity, whatever you may think of him, he's not a journalist. I saw him hosting a Ted Cruz rally in the 2018 Senate race. I was down in Houston, and he was the one introducing Cruz and whooping the crowd up. This is somebody who's a fan, and he's clearly a fan of Donald Trump's, as we've seen in several emails and texts that he didn't want us to see. It also makes business sense for Fox because they're losing their hemorrhaging viewers, if we're to believe what we read, and to bring Trump back into their fold, especially going into a year where access to Trump is going to be important because of all the legal troubles he's going to be facing over the course of the next few months. And he is, at least in the polls, the current leader for the nomination for the Republican Party. So it fits.
And I think a lot of the information that come through, Jim, just to Michael's point about Sean Hannity, reflects the fact that he was essentially a White House advisor during the Trump administration.
Right. It's I would say it's one step forward and two steps back. The step forward is that it's on tape; it's not live. The two steps back is that Hannity is the moderator, and that it's going to be just another rally. Michael's correct. Not only was he at Cruz rallies, but Hannity also appeared at Trump rallies on stage, called on stage by Trump. So, as a supporter. So to call this in any way a journalistic endeavor is it's just another rally. It's just on television. At least they'll tape it. So I would imagine. What is interesting is that I'm wondering whether or not they're putting it on tape because they may have learned a little bit of their lesson from Dominion and putting false claims on the air, which Trump is, of course, going to do about fake elections, could make Fox liable again.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's really good.
If he in fact goes after Jean Carroll and libels her again, is Fox going to be liable because they allowed him to do it on their air? Didn't they learn their lesson? So I think they may be putting it on tape. This is giving Fox more credit than they deserve, but it's possible that they're trying to avoid liability.
It's such a clean take because when you think about it from a CNN perspective, the comments were, well, look at how CNN let him run. There was no way to curb that dog, essentially, once you let Trump go out live. But your point is quite different, which is the legal liability, the legal stink, which is not just stink and not just a bunch of pundits talking about it after the fact. They're really dollars and cents, and Fox knows that better than anyone. Love that take. What about Ron DeSantis? Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, I think that's where you're going, Mark. I mean, I think Fox, just to add one more thing to this conversation, and I think you may have been going there with Ron DeSantis, is that Trump people don't want Fox to be the domain of Ron DeSantis, because like it or not, they get more viewers. They will get more viewers as it goes on from conservatives and Republicans. Their nightly coverage of the election and their results coverage is going to be where a lot of conservatives and Republicans go. So they don't want to cede all that ground to Ron DeSantis.
The DeSantis announcement on Twitter, we talked about it yesterday, was such a mess. But I thought his follow-up with the J6 pardons being held out as a possibility and something that he would review, it puts him in a camp that's an interesting one. And I'm wondering, are more and more people in that camp? Is that the hymnal from which they're all singing now, Jim?
Well, as long as MAGA controls the Republican Party, which they do, and that puts anybody who's going to win the primary in a terrible position, including Ron DeSantis, who is having to move to the right over and over again. Because when it's whoever wins that primary, and it's likely to be Donald Trump at this point, unless he gets more legal trouble, they're going to be in a corner. And when it comes to appealing the general election, the Republicans did not do well in the off-year election in 2022 for two reasons: abortion and January 6th. They're not fixing that in any way. And Ron DeSantis has put himself in a terrible hole. He tried to do it quietly, but he signed a 6-week abortion ban. 6 weeks. That's a total abortion ban. Most women don't know they're pregnant within 6 weeks. So that is a no in Florida. So that's going to be a real problem for Ron DeSantis in the general election. And now he's supporting January 6th traitors who have just been told by a judge, 2 of them at least, that they're going to be in prison for many, many years, that he's going to pardon those people. That is not an effective message to independents and the general public.
And it's those independents, Michael Shure, that he has to win over, although not in the primary, I suppose.
Well, not in the primary, but it's hard to backtrack, and the contagion of this abortion stuff on the Republican side, with state by state falling today. A judge in South Carolina saying, "Well, we're going to put a hold on it," but I don't see how those are going to endure those holds when the wave of conservative legislatures around the country, in several states anyway, is moving that way. This is a party that didn't learn its lesson from the midterms. I mean, abortion was the reason why it's a razor thin margin in the House, and was not just a cakewalk for the Republicans. So it is a curious thing, but they back themselves into this corner. Republicans always have a very difficult time, and Democrats as well, running one way during a primary and running the other during a general. But abortion is one of those issues that is simply not going to move people. And January 6th, I think, brings people into that hole. It's not like you go from being, let's say, a Democrat who's very in favor of let's say open borders, which doesn't exist, but I want to paint an extreme. And then you get to a general election and they say, no, we got to close the border. We got to do that. It's easier to forgive that than it is to forgive supporting a law that's on the books that affects every woman in America, not just people who are impacted by immigration. So it's a complex thing.
Yeah, and that's the independent part. I mean,
right.
As you say.
That is independent. That's exactly right.
So, as this field begins to sort of take on the texture that was anticipated, which is a lot of people primarying Trump, but Trump really being the most popular guy at the dance, it likely heads toward the kind of conclusion that we anticipate, which is it'll be Biden and Trump at the end of it all.
Yeah, it's a situation nobody really wants, but has no alternative for. The only thing that's going to avoid this, there are only 2 things that are going to happen. One, Trump is actually put in prison before the election, or that he is so damaged by the January 6th indictments that are to come and may come as soon as, somebody was saying, today or next week, or something happens to Joe Biden's health. Those are the only 2 things that are going to stop a Biden-Trump rematch, which nobody, according to the polls, really wants to see, but it seems to be inevitable.
I mean, there is a third thing, which is really, really unlikely, but that a prominent Democrat decides to run against Biden over the summer. And that the poll numbers for the president stay where they are among Democrats, and they see an avenue and they're unforgiving about it. I don't know who that person would be, but you have to, I think, put that into the possibilities list, because as unseemly as it is, I do think that there is a path, at least to have a legitimate chance and not be RFK Jr. and not be Marianne Williamson, but to be a party person. But again, that's a real long shot. And I think what Jim said is the most likely. These people, I think many of them, people run for president so that their name, they get higher name recognition. So 4 years from now, it's what Ronald Reagan did. It's what many, Bill Clinton did it. People, or he certainly put his hat into a ring. People do it so that they get name recognition down the road. I think in the case of, I guess, George Bush Sr. as well, there are people that are running for that purpose, but in the back of their minds is what Jim painted, which is that Trump could go down, or these indictments could be so strong that state parties don't want to put him on the ballot, which, again, these are long shot things. But that's why some of these people are running for president, because they think that this is a wide open race should Trump not be on the ticket.
It's asked who would be a prominent Democrat at this point. I think that's a fair follow-up. Do you have a couple of names in mind?
Yeah, I mean, certainly governors. I think Gavin Newsom would be one. I don't think he would be the one to do it. I think that Roy Cooper in North Carolina, a Southerner who doesn't have as much to lose by going against the president, who's popular, who's a Democrat, who can maybe promise you a state that you wouldn't otherwise have gotten, which is a rare thing in politics. I think Gretchen Whitmer maybe, though I don't think she would have the success that some of those others would. But, I don't think, it's clearly not going to be the vice president. I don't think somebody like Amy Klobuchar, who is likable and whatnot, she's not a rock the boat person. It has to be somebody who doesn't have a lot to lose in their day job by running. And in that case, it's generally a governor.
I see.
Another name that comes out there that I think is good is Sherrod Brown in Ohio, which of course is a key state. He would be interesting, and
it's an election year for him too.
Yeah, and he's a maverick enough that he could do it. I think the strongest candidate is in fact the California governor, but he is positioning himself, I think, as a spokesman for the progressive wing, and because the other two spokespeople for the progressive wing, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, are getting up there. So I think that that Gavin Newsom is positioning himself to be a big voice on the left, and for the next race, a good candidate.
I'm going to push back a little on what Jim said about the progressive. He's trying to get some progressive support, but the progressives in America don't look at Gavin Newsom in the same way they look at Bernie Sanders or even Elizabeth Warren. So it would be a big gambit for him to try and become that candidate. And as a matter of fact, I think what he wants to do is be able to pull people in a better way from that group, and also hang on to moderate Democrats, because he is part still of the Democratic Party, much more so aligning himself with them than the others.
But his statements have been very progressive.
Yep, his policies.
He always talks. He talks progressive, but the progressives feel let down by Newsom in some ways.
In some ways, they do. But he also is the original progressive in many ways. He's the first person to talk about gay marriage. He's the first person to do progressive immigration reform. I mean, so his being right on issues is super important, and progressives need to take note of that on social issues. When it comes to corporations and banks, it starts to veer a little bit.
His biggest problem, of course, is homelessness in California, and that's he's got to. If they're able to do something, and they're starting to try to do it here in Los Angeles, where I live, they are beginning to clean up the streets a bit. It's difficult. It's a terrible problem. And he hasn't gotten it yet, but if they are able to make any dent in this homelessness problem, and he's able to take a victory lap somehow, that will make him a viable candidate.
Yeah, for sure. And his vulnerabilities, there's several. Every candidate has them. I think one vulnerability is that he promised the president that he wouldn't run, or he promised folks that he wouldn't run unless the president didn't. Hard, I think, to backtrack on that and not be seen disfavorably.
The Hillary Clinton interview that she gave this week, I thought was provocative. It wasn't provocative in some ways, but then it was around Dianne Feinstein. We've talked about Dianne Feinstein before. And the part that wasn't provocative around Dianne Feinstein with Hillary Clinton was she suffered greatly from shingles, and, she was reelected by the people of California. And now I'm quoting from the Clinton statement. And they voted for her again not very long ago. And for those reasons, she should remain in office, she's been a remarkable and very effective leader. Okay, I mean, that's what you'd expect to say, and you could certainly disagree with some of that, but recently in terms of effectiveness. But then she went on to say this, and I wanted to get you guys to weigh in. Here's the dilemma. This is a quote from Hillary Clinton. The Republicans will not agree to add someone else to the Judiciary Committee if she retires. This is, of course, because she's got, a powerful committee membership. Dianne Feinstein does, right? When she was gone, they couldn't get any justices confirmed. Judicial nominees without Republican support. I want you to think about how crummy that is. I don't know in her heart about whether she really would or wouldn't, but right now she can't, because if we're going to get judges confirmed, which is one of the most important continuing obligations that we have, then we cannot afford to have her seat vacant. If Republicans were to say and do the decent thing and say, well, this woman was gravely ill, she had just lost her husband to cancer, of course, we will let you fill this position if she retires, but they won't say that, she continued. So what are we supposed to do? All these people pushing her to retire, fine. We get no more judges? I don't think that's a good trade-off. Your thoughts, Michael?
I mean, I don't necessarily agree. That's a possibility. I don't agree that that is what is going to happen. I think that, that you could look at it and you could say, hey, this is not good because if Feinstein isn't there, that seat lays empty. But I don't know that Senate precedent is correct about what Secretary Clinton is saying. And I do think with the majority in the Senate, they'll be able to get somebody onto that committee. I don't think that people are looking at it. I mean, what Hillary Clinton says, we should also say, doesn't really matter. It's interesting fodder. She's a former colleague of Dianne Feinstein's. The Clintons, as we know, are extremely loyal to those who are loyal to them and extremely vindictive to those who are not, which is not atypical of many people in politics. So it's not surprising that she's supporting Feinstein. This reason is to, I think, sow doubt in the people who are pushing Feinstein out. I don't know that that's really what would happen. I guess it's a possibility, but common wisdom says that they'll fill that position.
Jim?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Hillary Clinton is in a position where, she has to be nice to Dianne Feinstein. And, I wish we all could be nice to Dianne Feinstein. She's had a great career and has been a groundbreaker. But for a woman who was the first viable candidate to be president of the United States, to the first female, to come out and try to push Dianne Feinstein out of office would be a very difficult thing to do, and I don't think she can do that. In my opinion, Dianne Feinstein is not really there and should retire. That's the bottom line, and then the Democrats have to fight to replace her, and they do have a lot of power, and they could do that. Is there an outside chance that they can't? I don't think. Probably not. So I would go with Michael. I think that they ought to let her go, and she ought to retire gracefully. Maybe it's too late to retire gracefully at this point, but she should retire.
I was really depressed almost by the latest Supreme Court decisions regarding clean water. They really are, the court, so friendly to corporate interests, so friendly to corporate polluters, and so anti-consumer, so anti-habitat. And you realize the critical nature of this court and the coming decisions. I mean, they go well beyond Roe. We tend to focus on Roe because it's important to focus on it, and that really reflected sort of the agenda-driven nature of this court, and also this insanely biased nature of this court. But now you're seeing in some of these other lesser, if you will, I mean, that is, they don't quite rise to the profile decisions from this court, the way they are so pro-polluter. So I always come back around to the Supreme Court and how big and this is why I bring it up to you guys, from a political standpoint, and you have already said that you think that the abortion situation, the question of choice for women, is going to be a big driver of this election. can the Democrats keep this front and center, or do you think it automatically defaults to being front and center for them, Jim?
Well, I guess my overall comment on this issue of the Supreme Court is, to all you independents and all you Democrats who did not come out for Hillary Clinton because you didn't like her as a person, this is what you have. This is what's happened, because elections have consequences. And when you didn't come out and vote, you let Donald Trump win, and he packed the court with conservatives. Now we're stuck with it, and we're stuck with it for a while. And it really is damaging the country. Environmental issues are being pushed away. The court is against those. The court is absolutely what you say. It is corporations. Corporations are people, and the Supreme Court, those on the Supreme Court now, just believe that they will rule in favor of corporations over people. They also are going to take away votes from African Americans and minorities by making it more restrictive in how you vote. The Supreme Court has an activist agenda now, and there really isn't anything that can be done about it until they start dying off.
And Republicans are much better at using the Supreme Court as an election, because I think that's part of what you were asking too, Mark, is as an election issue than Democrats. And Democrats knew what Mitch McConnell did with Merrick Garland. They knew what was coming up in 2016 in terms of retirements and possibly deaths, both of which happened. And Donald Trump was able to appoint 3 new members of the Supreme Court. So they could have made that a much bigger political issue. But when you go out with Republicans on the trail, they're talking about it constantly. They're talking about the court. They're talking about the lower courts. They're talking about the being active in that way and making it a campaign issue. For some reason, Democrats don't do that enough. They sort of feel like law is settled law, and we can complain about bad rulings. And ironically, this clean water bill that you were, or case that you were talking about, is not in favor of a corporation, but it's going to be precedent for corporations. This was a couple that wanted to build a house on a lake. I think it was in Idaho or Washington.
It's development, right? Exactly.
Yeah. And so but it is now precedent, and it weakens the EPA, which is of course good for business and corporations. And so these are the kinds of things that can very easily be turned into campaign issues. I mean, this is a slightly more complex even in the way I'm describing it, but there are ways to make it beyond just abortion. And I think that's important for Democrats, and they don't do it enough.
It's interesting. I'm seeing something like this. Brian says, blame the Democratic Party for picking terrible candidates. Blame Ginsburg for not retiring. Blame Ginsburg.
Right.
Certainly. Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Yeah. I don't know. Go ahead. First you, Michael.
I think that, I understand the emotion behind that the text, but it's not as simple as that. Democrats have been, by and large, happy with their candidates. Hillary Clinton was wildly popular, got a lot of votes, was wildly unpopular in some circles too, and lost an election that perhaps a different candidate would have won. We don't know. Or she should have run better. Joe Biden was clear out there, was going to be the person they thought that could beat Donald Trump, and he won for that reason. And now they're not picking a candidate, they're settling for an aging president. But and should Ginsburg have retired? I think probably. I think she should have retired when she got her first bad cancer diagnosis, because it's unfair to the court. But by the same token, that you can run on these issues separately and not blame the people for them, blame the party for not having a message that talks about things that people are really interested in, like the Supreme Court, because we saw last year with Roe v. Wade, with the Dobbs decision, that independents came flocking toward Democrats because of a ruling like that. So it means that there is a way to preach to the people who are going to be electing these people.
I mean, I would just say it's so true on the messaging and Ginsburg, but now the messaging gets a lot easier because the fire is burning so hot, and the problem with that is you've let it turn into a blaze that's burning you. Okay, I get it. Then now the messaging is a bit easier. Go ahead.
And
Jim.
the other message that has to get through, that the Democrats, because of all the noise that's going on in Washington now with the economics, with the debt ceiling, but we can't forget gun control. gun control is a popular issue among independents, among Democrats, among women with children. The Democrats need to run on abortion. They need to run on gun control, 1 and 2, then and then democracy. If they do that, all of those issues poll way over in favor, 60, 70% in favor of the Democratic liberal position. And they got to hammer that home because, and do they have good candidates? I mean, I think they do statewide, and I think in many states they do. Is there a problem because Joe Biden is aging and shows it more and more every day? Yes, there is. But Trump is still a crook. And and I think Biden will still beat him, even though he's going to be limping toward the finish line. And it's a shame that we can't do something about that. I covered Joe Biden. I've known him. I've gone to his house. He's a pleasant, affable guy. Okay. Everybody pretty much likes Joe Biden in Washington, D.C. But somebody's got to stand up and tell him, whisper in his ear, that he's ruining his legacy and he ought to go away as the president he promised he would be, a transitional president who would bring us back to normalcy. And he's done that. And now he ought to bow out and let somebody else take over. Am I dreaming? Yes, I am. That's not going to happen, but I wish it would.
I don't think that it's off the table entirely. I don't think it's 100%. I don't think it's a dream that can't be realized, because I think that there are, the fact that it's discussed even means that there's a possibility of it. It's remote, but a possibility.
Well, we'll certainly discuss it again. Have a good weekend, gentlemen. Thank you. Always appreciate you boys being here. You're very generous with your time on Fridays. Jim Avila, you can find him. Now he's writing a column. I saw you're writing a column on politics and media.
Yeah, Barrett News Media.
Yeah,
it's called. If you go to my Twitter, Jim Avila ABC, you'll find it.
Good deal. And of course, you see Michael Shure everywhere. As I say, he's covering rallies, he's covering political races, and regular on TYT. Love that you guys are here. Thank you so much for being here, both of you. Michael, Jim, thanks. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.